I wonder about that a lot. Like how every person walks in the door on a Sunday, like what their state of mind is, what their spiritual disposition is. I can't control it, but as a preacher, something I think about a lot. I hope, what I was thinking about, I was like, I want to get up and say like, hey, are you ready to like listen today to what God's going to do? But then that sounds like I'm like manipulating you to listen to me and like putting the pressure on you to listen. Seems a little lame. So I hope I did a good job preparing and listening to what God wanted me to say. And I hope you are ready to hear it. Not my words, but his. You'll have to filter mine out because there's some in here. There's some. All right, so yeah. My favorite book series of all time is The Chronicles of Narnia. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's the one where the kids go through the wardrobe into a different land and there's a lion there. That's like the summary of the whole thing. My favorite book is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And this book, the entire book is this journey on a ship where they go into uncharted territory, which is a cool concept because I don't know if you've ever reflected on this. It's a weird thing that my wife rolls her eyes at every time I bring it up because I bring it up weirdly often, that we don't have uncharted territory anymore on this earth. I get depressed. I'm like, man, wouldn't it be cool if there was like a land you could go to where no one had been before? It just doesn't exist anymore. We have Google Earth. You can see everything without leaving your house. But they got to go on this journey on this ship where they were going to all these different islands that people had never mapped out before. And the book kind of follows them from island to island. Every chapter is an island. Every island is a new adventure. And they face all these different kinds of enemies. They face a dragon. They face invisible enemies on one island, trying to fight that. That one island has a pool where anything that falls into it turns into gold. Which I know you're like, well, that's not dangerous. Well, not dangerous like a dragon, but it's a different kind of dangerous. So every island, there's a new danger to face, a new enemy to conquer. But one of the islands that they encounter is called the Dark Island. And as they sail closer to it, they realize that there's like this dome of darkness covering this whole thing. It's a clear blue, beautiful day. But they realize that, there's something surrounding this island. It's a darkness. And as they get closer, they start to have this debate as to whether or not they should actually go in and try to explore the island. There's some people who want to, some people who don't. The words honor and courage are thrown around, and they eventually all say, okay, I guess we'll do this thing. So they slowly lurch into this dome, and immediately when they cross from the one side to the other, it goes from daytime to darkness. And part of the reason I love these books is because C.S. Lewis, the author, he weaved in so many life illustrations into all of the chapters, just about of every single one of the books. So they enter this darkness, and immediately there's no wind. They have to start rowing. It's a lot harder in the darkness. They don't know how long they've been there. Time starts to kind of warp when they're in this darkness, and they're disoriented by it. Eventually, they come close enough to the actual island that they hear there's a man on the island, and they put a spotlight out, and they see him, and he's been there a long time. He's got crazy hair, big long beard, crazy eyes, and they're like, man, let's help him, let's get him aboard. So they pull this old man aboard. The moment they get him onto the ship, he starts freaking out, saying, hey, turn the ship around, get away from here, get away from here, get away from here, let's go. And they're all like, oh, slow down, old man, what's wrong? And Crazy Eyes goes, the reason you need to run is because this is the island where dreams come true. And at first, everybody on the ship's like, this is the island we've been looking for. And they start listing the things they'd hope to find on this island where dreams come true. And the crazy guy goes, no, you misheard me. I didn't say daydreams. I said dreams, as in nightmares. So not your hopes, your fears come alive on this island. And there's like a moment where everybody's kind of processing that. And then the ship explodes into activity, and they all go down, and they turn this thing around, and they start rowing their way away from this island, trying to get back out of the darkness. And they find that it takes them longer to get out of the darkness than it did to get in. Amen. And then as they're rowing, every man starts to hear a different thing that he feared, a different thing that he's dreamed before. And they're all different, and they're all afraid for their own reasons. And you can, like, the chapter almost builds into this fever pitch where you think something's going to happen, but nothing actually happens. They eventually get out, and they cross over from the darkness back into the light. And the moment they get into the light, it's one of those moments where they all just start laughing because they're feeling silly for being so afraid just a moment ago in the dark. And now they're in the light. The reason this chapter, probably one of my favorite chapters in the entire series, it fascinates me because if you look at every single island they visit on this journey, they face real dangers, dragons and invisible enemies, and they face them and they fight them. This is the only chapter in the book where they run, where they retreat. And that's fascinating. Because nothing happened. No monsters appeared, no giant snakes or spiders or dragons, no drowning or fire or falling, the many things you might dream of that you would be afraid of. None of that actually happened. Nothing happened. The only thing on their entire journey that caused them to retreat was in their own imaginations. Real danger. They faced it, they fought it. Imagined danger, they ran. Their imaginations turned them into cowards. Imagination. You have an imagination. You have one. And I know that's not something you probably think about a lot, because I think in general as adults, we kind of think of imagination as something for kids, right? You watch a kid play with Barbies or play with Army Men, and you think imagination, you see kids playing in a tree house, playing castle or playing house, and you think, okay, that's imagination. And you don't think of yourself as like doing that anymore, right? You don't do that anymore. As you grow up, you stop pretending to live, and you start living, right? You don't play house anymore. You actually do that, right? And it's not near as fun as when you were a kid, right? You're like, why did we do this willingly back then? So you assume that imagination is something for kids, that you've matured past it. That's a safe assumption. But I read a study this week, University of Kent, not Kent State, but it's the one over in the UK. They studied imagination, and they did it a certain kind of way. They were trying to isolate kids' imagination versus adults' imagination and trying to measure which one was more powerful. And they came to a little different conclusion. They discovered in their study that adults' imagination is actually more powerful and more vivid and more detailed than a kid's imagination. And they even said that the sharpest imaginations went all the way up to age 60, that it keeps getting more powerful as you go. I was like, at first it's like, really? Like, did some cosplay Comic-Con nerd write this study? Like, I don't believe you, man. Like, that sounds like you're making it up and trying to justify your, whatever. And no offense to that. I had somebody on Thursday come up to me because they play Dungeons and Dragons, and he was like, I'm sorry ahead of time. I know I offended you, because they use their imagination all the time. But what was convincing to me when I read the study was they said, no, it's not that a kid's imagination is more powerful than an adult's imagination. It's that kids use their imagination for different things than adults do, and we don't recognize it. So the kids is more obvious. And the kids is around them all the time, right? Toys come alive. They start to pretend to be things they are not. Adults don't do that anymore. Adults use our imagination for one of two things mainly. You use your imagination for anticipation and, do you know the other one? Anxiety. Anxiety. Anticipation or anxiety. So now, as an adult, your imagination is kind of aimed forward. That's the difference, right? Kids' imagination is all around them all the time. At any moment, they could just burst into a new reality. For us, we aim it forward. We use our imagination to come up with worlds in the future, to come up with different, varying futures that we could live in. And depending on how you use that power, and it is a power, it is either producing anticipation in your life or it is producing anxiety. So I guess the first thing I want to say to you is stop thinking that you don't have a very powerful imagination. You do. It's not whether or not it's powerful, it's how are you using it? How are you using your imagination that is now just aimed forward in your life? What kind of futures are you using your imagination to create? So there's this line from an Eminem song, something you hear in church all the time, I know. Used to be a big fan back in high school. And it's not even a great line, but like it stuck out to me. I was fascinated with Eminem because he is a master at his craft. Regardless of what you think about him, this is Mosaic, so most of you like get this, but like every once in a while we have somebody who's like really churched come in and are like, did you just talk about Eminem in like a positive way? Yes, from a craft perspective, the guy's really, really good. He has a power. And here's the line. And again, it's not that great, but it stood out to me. The line is, if I could only use this power for good, I wouldn't, not even if I could. And it stuck out to me because when I was in high school, I was like, oh, he knows he has a power, with words. And he also knows that he's not using it for good. I thought that was interesting because it's implied in there that he's like saying he's not using it for good. But I always kind of wish that he would consider it. Because he is amazing at what he does. I think he's the best, not maybe just the best to do it right now, but maybe one of the best ever. I mean, he can, do you know he can rhyme the word orange? And you're like, that's not possible. Your 5th grade English teacher told you that wasn't possible, but he can do it. He can do it. He's that good. And I'll tell you how he does it here in a minute. But he recognizes his power and he says he's not going to use it for good. So my question to you is, you have a more powerful imagination now than you ever did as a kid. How are you using that power? How are you using the power of your imagination now? For anticipation or anxiety? And let me ask you this while you're pondering that. Why do you think God gave you an imagination? He didn't have to, right? Why give us this ability? Why not just have us live in the here and the now? Why allow us, give us the power to create worlds in our mind? Why allow us this ability to create possible futures in our mind? Why would God give us that power? Can I suggest that your imagination is supposed to be the incubator for great things in your life? That God gave you this power for good, that he wants you to have a powerful imagination, that it is meant to be the birthplace of amazing things in your life. The first step towards your future happens right here in your imagination, that God wants your future to begin here and start to exist in the real world. That he gave you this power not as a torture device, but it's supposed to be a source of hope. A source of inspiration. It's supposed to be a good thing. So again, how are you using this power? So what I want to do is we're going to take 2 weeks. We're going to take this week and next week, and we're going to look at a father-son duo in the Bible. And they both use their imaginations, and they use them in opposite ways. We're going to look at Saul and his son Jonathan. Little micro stories about both of them. And one uses this power for evil, I suppose, and one uses it for good. Now, if you know anything about Saul, you know he's always used as the example of what not to do. So we're starting here. So really, this is one sermon in 2 parts, so if you want to hear the whole sermon, you have to come back next week. There's your hook. Backstory. Saul is king of Israel at this time, and Israel is fighting the Philistines. As usual, seems to be a never-ending struggle. So Israel and Philistine, they've faced off many times. And I just want to give you the verse here that kind of sets the scene. It's 1 Samuel chapter 28, starting in verse 4. The Philistines set up their camp at Shunem, and Saul gathered all the army of Israel and camped at Gilboa. So you kind of get this impression. I love these verses like this. It's kind of like mentally you're going to be able to picture the scene here. You got the Philistines on one side and you've got the people of Israel on the other side. And what I want you to know about this scene is that Saul has seen this before. This is not a new thing in his life. He's not experiencing the Philistines arraying for battle against the Israelites for the first time. He's seen this before, many times. They fight constantly. So this isn't new. He's in this situation. He's been in this situation. His reaction, however, is a little different here. Something happens in him. Look at verse 5. When Saul saw the vast Philistine army, he became frantic with fear. Frantic with fear. Again, he's seen this before. He's not had this reaction before. And the original language, the little phrase frantic with fear, if you just one-to-one translated it, it would be that his heart shook within him. Like, you ever have your heart beat so fast that it shakes you a little bit, that it's an actual moves you, you feel the vein kind of popping out of your neck a little bit? That kind of adrenaline rush hit Saul when he saw this army that, again, he'd seen before. But for some reason, it's different this time. So what is it? What has Saul's heart vibrating here with fear? Isn't it Saul's own imagination being aimed forward into the future, imagining this battle not going well? Isn't that what this is? Because it's not what actually is happening. There's no arrows being loosed. There's no swords being swung, no charges being ordered. Nothing's happened yet. But he's just gripped with fear here. He is using his imagination to look forward into the future and imagining things not going well. It's not his current reality that's got him shook. It's the possible future one that has him shook. The source of his fear is right here in his own imagination. You ever had that happen before? You ever been gripped with fear when you're completely safe? You know, your head's lying on your pillow. The doors are locked. You live in Wadsworth. You're probably good, right? It's nothing bad going to happen. There's no boogeyman in your closet. There's nothing actually happening. But your heart is vibrating with fear because your imagination has raced into the future and created a world that you don't want to live in. And it's caused your heart to shake. So what should you do when that happens? So I hate what happens next in the story. I hate it. And you will too, but there's a deep lesson in it that we have to look at. It's verse 6. Look what Saul does. He asked the Lord what he should do, but the Lord refused to answer him, either by dreams or by sacred lots or by the prophets. So Saul went to God. By the way, that is the right answer. That's what you're supposed to do. And that's why this verse actually bothers me a little bit. And if you're reading this story, it should bother you too. Because by the way, what I'm going to tell you in this sermon is that when you're gripped with fear over a possible future, that you should go to God. Spoiler alert, sorry, that is actually the answer. But Saul did it, and you could say it didn't work. And at first, I didn't even want to talk about this verse. I wanted to kind of just glance over it. But this is the problem. This is the problem. So, here's what Saul does next, and we can learn from this. He sees the Philistine army. His heart is gripped with fear. He goes to God. It doesn't work. God doesn't respond in the way that he wants, and God doesn't respond in the time frame that he wants. So here's what he does, and I'm not even kidding, this is real. If you've never read the story before, you're going to be like, really, is that in the Bible? But it is. Here's what he does. Are you ready? Saul goes and visits a witch. A witch, not like Hermione, like a witch. Not Hermione, but one weirder than that, like for real. I'm not kidding. I'm not going to read it because I don't want to go on a tangent off into that, because some of you sometimes if we go into a certain part of Scripture, you'll have more questions than I can possibly answer, and that's not what we're after today. We'll preach that like Halloween next year, okay? We'll do that. It'll be perfect. It'll be right on point. He goes and visits a witch and to get what he perceived he needed in that moment. Now, okay, so we can apply this one of two ways. You pick which one you need. And maybe this is good for you. Maybe you can get a win here. If you're ever struggling with your imagination coming up with dark possible futures and your heart's racing and you go to God and you feel like maybe you don't get the answer, here it is. You ready? Don't go see a witch. Good? Some of you are like, I did it, check. Like I just did the thing. I actually feel really good about myself that I haven't ever done that in my life. And maybe that could be just the the easy base level application of this. And by the way, some churches, that's what they would apply. Like, witches are bad, don't do that. Okay, cool. You got that though, right? I hope you didn't come in this morning like, I wonder, the question I need answered in church today is, should I go visit a witch? I hope Pastor talks about that. Well, good for you. You got that one. But for most of us, this is not a struggle, right? I don't know about you. I don't struggle with this. I don't wonder about this. So maybe we could dig a little bit beneath the surface. Because I'll be honest, here's my reaction to this part of the story. When I read this, I think, Saul, you idiot. Like, that's obvious. You whiffed on that one. It's so stupid what you just did. And I can, when I read this story, kind of start to push away from Saul and be like, I'm nothing like that guy because I would never do that. But what if we took the details out and kept the framework? Because here's what he did. Saul went to God. God didn't answer in like the way he wanted or in the time frame that he wanted. So he went to something else. That, maybe not a witch, but that sounds a little more familiar, doesn't it? That maybe a lot of times we struggle with things, we do go to God. It's not that you ignore God, you do go to God, but you don't get the answer the way you want it, or you don't get the answer in the time frame that you want, so you just move on to the next thing. You try the next solution, as if God is an option, one of the possible options that you could use to solve whatever problem you have. And I think that's probably the deeper lesson here. That if you struggle with your imagination forming horrible futures, and you pray and maybe you don't quite get what you need in that moment, you move on. So if I may, I want to suggest, and this might not be you, but maybe you give up on God too quick in those moments. Can I say it that way? Or you move on from God too quickly. It's not that you've given up on him, you just move on to the next possible solution. You say a sentence like, and you probably don't say it like out loud, but you say something like, I tried it. I tried going to God. I tried, and it didn't work. It didn't do what I needed it to do. But Saul, in this moment, treating God as if God needs to just come when he's called. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's like, hey, he goes to God, I need you to respond in this way and in this time frame. I think that's a dangerous place to be when you approach the God of the universe to say, I need you to respond like this and during this time frame. Maybe we should consider that when we approach the all-powerful, all-knowing God of the universe, that might not be the best attitude to bring with us into his presence. And that maybe when we go to God, there needs to be a level of patience that comes along with it. Because you know that when you work out for like a week, you're not gonna like look in the mirror and be like, where are my abs at, right? You know that, right? You know it doesn't work that way. You know that like you don't get this immediate transformation the moment you start doing the right thing, right? You don't get that anywhere in the world. But for some reason, when we go to God, we expect this immediate. We expect things to transform immediately. And I wonder if for Saul, if we look at Saul and say, instead of treating God like a puppy that needed to come to him really quickly, or instead of treating God like one of the possible solutions, he's just going to check him off. That didn't work. What if instead Saul had gotten really desperate for God to show up in his situation, and he was going to wait as long as it took for God to show up? I wonder if things would have turned out different. Because there's a lot of kings in the Bible, a lot of Israelite kings in the Bible who don't live the way they're supposed to live and don't do what they're supposed to do, and they get desperate in situations and they go to God, and God shows up for them. They don't deserve it. They didn't do anything good to earn God coming down, but God comes down for them. And I wonder if Saul had had that kind of a desperation, if Saul had had any level of patience in waiting on God, that if he wouldn't have shown up for him as well. You know what, I preached this on Thursday, and when I first preached it, I thought, forgive me, I thought it was really good. And then when I got home, I had this tortured thought that anytime I preach on a subject like this, I run the risk of unnecessarily producing guilt in people's lives. And that became now my greatest fear as I stand up here before you. For those of you who maybe struggle with your imaginations producing scary futures. Notice how I'm saying that instead of just saying anxiety. Maybe they're different. Maybe they're not the exact same thing. Maybe your imagination producing scary futures causes anxiety. Or maybe it's the other way around. But I don't think they're the same. And I don't want you to leave here feeling, how do you say that, worse about yourself. No, maybe every once in a while we do need that. I don't want you to feel hopeless. I want you to feel full of hope. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of shift into being more practical, if that makes sense. So if you struggle with your imagination, and this can be, by the way, nobody sitting here doesn't struggle with this on some level. As in, I know there are some people who like, this is your steady state normal for you. Your imagination is always producing a dark future. Always, and you're always fighting that. For others of us, maybe it's more seasonal or situational, as in you get into a spot, you see something coming, and all of a sudden your brain's like, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? What if this happens? And it's not like a steady state thing, it's more of it comes up every once in a while in your life. I don't think there's anybody sitting here going, I never struggle with this at all, right? Like you almost have to be a little bit like, I don't know, living in your own little world for that to be the case. Most of us live in the real world. So on some level, you either struggle with this maybe kind of all the time, or you struggle with this occasionally. So, your imagination, going to work, it's aimed forward now and it's producing futures in your mind. Scary things, anxiety-producing things. So, what do you do? Can I tell you how M&M rhymes orange? I know you've been thinking about it. You've been like coming up with words. Like, what word rhymes with orange? How does he do this? Well, there isn't a word that rhymes with orange. Your fifth grade teacher was right, the way you say it. But and you can Google it. There's an interview where he talks about this, and it's brilliant. And he can do it better than I can, obviously, because he's Eminem and I'm not. And that ship has sailed. I can't. I'm not going to be a rap. I'm not going to be a rapper. Sorry. You thought, but it's not. What he does is he takes a word like orange, and he changes the way he pronounces it. He changes the emphasis of the word. So instead of orange, it's orange, orange. And again, you can kind of hear his voice if you're familiar with his voice, orange. And when he changes the emphasis, all of a sudden it opens up more possibilities. And I love this. So orange rhymes with porridge, rhymes with 4-inch door hinge in storage. See how he can do that? And he just runs. He's got songs full of this stuff. I swear he does it on purpose just to show you how good he is. Because like his 5th grade teacher told him as well, that orange doesn't have anything that rhymes with it. And he's like, oh really? And he just writes whole songs and he does it. But that fast, when I watched that, and I watched that again this week, it struck me. I was like, wait a minute, there's something there. When he changes the emphasis of the word, all of a sudden possibilities opened up. He didn't just accept it. He manipulated the way he thought about it a little bit, and all of a sudden things opened up. And I thought, man, that's important, especially for the person who looks at their anxiety as this thing like the word orange, like there's just no way around it. I just kind of have to accept that this is it. Like, okay, but what if in your mind you did the same kind of thing here? What if it's all about emphasis? Because you do have some possible dark futures ahead of you, do you not? That can be real. Some of these things that you imagine in your mind, they actually happen. Statistically, it's only 8%, by the way, they say, of things that people worry about actually happen. But some do. But I do think you can choose what you emphasize. You can choose the thing that you think about. You can choose to emphasize a certain future over another one. So maybe that's one of the things that needs to happen. Because you do have a powerful imagination. And I actually think, let me give you a little bit more hope. If you really struggle with this, if you really struggle with your brain coming up with all these different futures that are not good, and maybe this is like a thing for you, I want to say, listen, maybe you have a really powerful imagination. And I think that actually is a good thing. It's just aimed at the wrong thing right now. You're emphasizing the wrong part of the word right now. That means there's huge hope that if you could aim it at the right thing, it could be just as powerful of a force for good in your life as it is for bad right now. The more powerful your imagination, the more powerful it can be in the right direction as well. Because I believe God gave you this. God gave you this power. Your imagination is supposed to be an incubator for great things. Birthplace of your future happens right here. Now look at the way Paul says this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. And this is the Bible. It says this. It says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Now, let's be real about this. If you're a Christian, you grew up in church, and you struggle with anxiety, the moment I said Philippians, you said 4:6, because you already knew, right? You already knew. It was boring, Pastor. I've heard this sermon before, right? I've been given this advice before. And we kind of have the same, can we be real? Let's be real. I know it's our church, but can we be real? A lot of times when we read this verse, if we struggle with anxiety, we have the same attitude about this verse that Saul had when he went to God. Didn't work. Didn't work. Give me another solution, man. This can't be the answer. Can't be the answer. I've tried it. And I get it. And this verse then can become a source of guilt and shame for you because you're like, it doesn't seem to work for me. I must be praying wrong or something. I don't want that for you. So let me suggest this. If you struggle with this a lot, or if you're in a season of this, maybe here's a mentality that would be different for you. Imagine scuba diving. And imagine taking a deep inhale. And then imagine taking that out of your mouth. Now, you start swimming around. And your lungs start burning. Would you go, didn't work. I have to breathe again. This is so weird. I thought that when I took air into my lungs, I'd just be good, but I feel like I have to breathe again. Would that be your attitude? No. You'd know that like you need to keep that in your mouth, that you need to, that's a thing that you need regularly in your life. You can't just and then take it out and be like, I'm good for a while, right? What if in those seasons where your imagination's running wild with negative futures, because I do think, listen, I'm not saying you don't pray, but I think Christians think of prayer more like eating or sleeping. We know we need it. We're aware that it's a thing that we need to have regularly in our life. But, I pray a couple times a day, like eating. And I'm nourished by that. But what if in certain seasons you need to change your mentality from thinking of prayer like eating to thinking of prayer like breathing? Like if it's really going wild up here, that you just can't afford to go very long without, because you wouldn't swim around underwater without that thing attached to your mouth. And maybe some seasons you can't walk around in your life without being connected to God in a very real and tangible way. And I know some of you are like, that sounds exhausting. Well, so is your anxiety. Can I just be right? Which exhausting do you want to pick? It's up to you. I think choosing to say, no, I'm going to go after this. Because think about that. What does he say? Don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. That means every time anxiety hits, you're supposed to pray. Every time. It's not, I prayed this morning, why is this happening? It's, I need to breathe again. That's the mentality. That's the way you should do this. I need you, God. I need you, God. I need you, God. It's a breath prayer. You're praying that every time you take a breath and push it out. I need you. I need you. I need you. You can't, and you can say, well, that means I'm weak. Fine, be weak and just cling to Jesus. That's the best place to be when you're weak. And I actually think that if you do that, that you will eventually get to the place where, what does he say happens? God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand, because anxiety is the only thing you've ever known. And then what happens? His peace will guard our hearts and minds as we live in Christ Jesus. That something will happen. And again, it's not like I did some crunches, why don't I have a six-pack? It's not like that. This is a thing. This is a practice. This is a thing where you're training yourself to go to God in prayer instead of have the anxious thought. This is a thing where you're training your imagination to not do that, to do something else instead. But as you do that, something starts to get built around your imagination. And God works in that, and he guards your heart. Now, Paul adds to that. He's not done, right? So Paul, the way Paul writes, I don't know if you've ever noticed, he'll have a thought and then he'll have the same thought kind of different. So he actually continues in verses 8 and 9. He's saying essentially a similar thing, but a different way. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about the things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you've learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing, then the God of peace will be with you. Isn't it? Again, it just sounds like he's saying the same thing in a different way, but look at the way he talks about your thoughts. He says, fix your thoughts. You can choose. You can choose your thoughts. Now, I know there's such thing as invasive thoughts, but you get to decide whether they stay or not. And here's how you do it. And this is really important because I think Paul here and Eminem actually agree that you have to change the emphasis for this to work. You have to change the emphasis of it. What are you fixed on? What are you focused on, right? He said, fix your thoughts. That's the definition of anxiety sometimes. My thoughts seem fixed on the wrong thing. So he's saying, no, fix them somewhere else. And what he brings up is this really important principle that I don't know if you've ever encountered before, but it's the principle of replacement, that you can't stop a thought, you have to replace the thought. Here's how I know it. When I say, stop thinking about a red car, stop thinking about a red car, you are disobeying me right now when you're thinking about a red car. Because the moment you tell yourself to not do it, it's actually your brain seems to be very rebellious and it does the very thing you're telling it not to do. So you actually have to replace it. You have to replace it. We do this with our 7-year-old. Our 7-year-old, every once in a while, he'll have a nightmare and I'll hear a little gentle knock on the door. And I hear it and Lisa doesn't. She stays asleep. It's my curse now for all those years when she had the baby and I just pretended to sleep through that. So now I wake up for this. And he'll tell me he had a nightmare, and this is just us. I'm not saying anything about you. We don't let our kids in our bedroom. I mean, they can walk through it, but they don't sleep in our bed, like ever. It's why we have 4 kids, actually. Good, okay, you get it. It's natural birth control. But I'll pick him up because they know they're not coming in, and I'll carry him back to his bed, and I'll pray with him. I usually, I do this thing where I kind of lean on him a little bit. I want him to feel the weight of me. There's something to that he knows dad is there. And then I'll do this thing. So I'll pray for him for sure. And I say, hey, buddy, I want you right now to think about which superhero's superpowers you'd want. And like, think about how fun it would be to have that. And you know, or you have 3 wishes. What would you wish for? And think about what that would be like to be able to live that out. And I purposely have him start thinking about something else. I don't tell him, hey, just don't think about that anymore. It doesn't work. I give him something else. I take that and I want to replace it with something else. And then I kiss him on the forehead and I leave. And I got to tell you, I have a pretty high success rate with this. And I know that sounds awfully childish, but what if that's kind of what you need? What if you can't stop these thoughts? What if you have to replace them? What if you have to try to actively think of something else? With that is a different thought, a new thought. Because again, I believe that God gave you your imagination as an incubator for great things in your life. He gave you a powerful imagination as a birthplace for his intended future for your life. Your imagination is supposed to be a gift from God. A gift from God. It's not supposed to be a source of torture. It's not supposed to be something that makes your life miserable. This is supposed to be a powerful force for good in your life. Don't let the enemy twist it. So we're taking communion today. I hope you got some communion on your way in. A little thing of juice. There's a little cracker in the top part. And here's what that, if you don't have it and you want it, you can raise your hand. We got some people who will give you some. We got a couple here. Here's what this is. The night Jesus was arrested, betrayed, and crucified, he took some bread and he broke it symbolically, saying, hey, this is my body, which is broken for you. And he took some wine and he gave it to his disciples. He said, this is my blood, which is spilled for you. And this is actually a powerful way where we can use our imaginations for good to remember, because Jesus said, anytime you do this, remember what I did for you. So Christian, you know that Jesus died for you in your place for your sins. And I want to be real careful with this, but I just want to suggest that maybe this can be a time here where you, as you think about the different things that God has forgiven you of, maybe you bring your imagination to God and you confess to him that you've been using it wrong. And you ask him to forgive you for the way you've been using your imagination. And I don't say that lightly. I know that's not always your choice, but bring it to him. Ask him to help you use it in the way he intended for you to use it. And remember that he is not this God of condemnation, but he is a loving Father. He's a loving Father. So close your eyes, let's pray. I want to just speak to you real quick. Maybe if you haven't, maybe you don't have a relationship with Jesus right now. Maybe you've never made that decision to surrender your life to him. I just want to give you an opportunity right now, here in this moment, between you and God. Surrender. Pray a short little prayer. Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I need your forgiveness. And if you do that, man, that begins something inside of your soul, a new life. So if you've never done that, man, I encourage you to make that decision here. Don't leave here without doing that. For the rest of us, pray with me. Jesus, I thank you so much for what you did on the cross. I thank you for this power that you've given us, the power of imagination. I pray for the person who struggles with using that to create negative futures, constantly producing anxiety in their life, Lord. I pray that maybe in this season they would see prayer to you like scuba gear, like breathing. Make them strong in that, Lord. Strong in their dependence on you. I pray for the person who maybe is going through a season, Lord, that they would do the same. That we would replace those thoughts with thoughts that are right and true. Fix our thoughts, like you said. And underneath it all and over top of it all, I pray that we would know deep down in our bones that you love us and you want good for us. Not always pleasurable, not always easy, but good. Good. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.